There was an artifact in the First Age that broke the will of a god. It was not a ring of power, forged in secret fire and dark sorcery to dominate the souls of others. It was a simple helmet of steel and gold, a work of mortal hands. Yet it was imbued with a power of defiance so profound it allowed a man to stare into the face of absolute evil and not yield. This was the Dragon-helm of Dor-lómin, the single most important heirloom of the Edain. But for the heroes who wore it, this symbol of unbreakable courage would become an iron cage of destiny. Its story is not one of triumph, but of a tragedy so deep and personal, it makes the breaking of Narsil and the fall of Isildur seem like a simple fireside tale. This is the secret history of an object that became a vessel for courage, defiance, and ultimately, a terrible, inescapable curse. Its story begins not in the sunlit lands of elves or men, but deep within the mountains, in the great mansions of the dwarves. In the city of Nogrod, in the First Age of the world, there lived a smith whose skill was legendary. His name was Telchar, and his mastery over metal was second only to the Fëanor, the elf who forged the Silmarils. Telchar worked with fire and steel to create things of both terrible beauty and immense power. For the lord of the neighboring city of Belegost, a mighty dwarf king named Azaghal, Telchar forged the greatest of his works, a helm of grey steel, cunningly wrought, with a visor shaped to strike fear into the hearts of all who beheld it. And upon its crest he mounted a small, golden image of a dragon, Glaurung, the first of the Urloki, the father of all dragons to come. The helm was enchanted with ancient spells of protection. It would guard its wearer from wound and death. More than that, it held a specific virtue of immense power. It protected the mind of its bearer from the fire, the dread, and the malevolent will of dragons. King Azaghal wore the helm in many battles, but its destiny lay elsewhere. In a rare act of friendship between the races, Azaghal gifted the helm to Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor. Maedhros was a mighty prince of the Noldor, his face fair and beardless as was the way of all elves, but his spirit was as hard as the northern ice. He had suffered unspeakable torment at the hands of Morgoth, the Dark Lord, yet his will to fight remained unbroken. The helm, a tool of war and defiance, was a fitting gift, but Maedhros, in an even greater gesture of reconciliation, would not keep it. To heal the bitter feud that had divided the elven princes of the Noldor, he in turn gifted the helm to his cousin, the High King Fingon. The helm thus passed from dwarf to elf, and from one elven house to another, a symbol of alliances forged in the face of a common, overwhelming enemy. It was a relic of hope in a darkening world. But if it could fortify the will of elves, what power could it grant to the race of men who were doomed to die? This question would soon be answered. High King Fingon, seeing the valor of the mortal men who had come to aid the elves in their war, bestowed the helm upon his most trusted vassal, Hador Lorindol, the golden-haired lord of the House of Hador, the greatest of the three houses of the Edain. From that day forward, the Dragon-helm of Dor-lómin, as it was now called, became the chief heirloom of Hador's line. It was worn by his son Galdor, and then it passed to his grandson, a man named Húrin Thalion, the Steadfast, the greatest warrior of mortal men to ever live. His strength was that of the ancient heroes, his mind was sharp, and his will was like the foundations of the mountains. He was a lord among men, beloved by the elves, and a terror to the armies of the Dark Lord. The dragon helm fit him, as if it had been forged for him alone. When he wore it, it was said that the gleam of his eyes from beneath its visor filled his enemies with a unique and paralyzing dread. The helm would face its greatest test at the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. This was the fifth great battle for Beleriand, the last, desperate gamble by the alliance of elves and men to overthrow Morgoth. Húrin, now lord of the House of Hador, marched to war under the banner of High King Fingon. Upon his head he wore the dragon helm. At first, the battle seemed to favor the armies of the west. Their charge was glorious, and the legions of Angband broke before them. But it was all a trap. Morgoth had held his deadliest forces in reserve, and through treachery and overwhelming numbers, the tide of the battle turned into a catastrophic slaughter. The alliance was shattered. The High King Fingon was slain, cut down by Gothmog, lord of Balrogs. Hope was extinguished. All that remained was survival. The last hope for the elves was Turgon, king of the hidden city of Gondolin. As Turgon's army attempted a retreat, Húrin and his brother Huor, with the last remnant of the men of Dor-lómin, made their stand. They held the rearguard at the fens of Sarek, forming a living wall of shields and spears between Turgon and Morgoth's pursuing hordes. They would buy the elves, escape with their own lives. One by one, the brave men of Dor-lómin fell. Húrin's beloved brother, was slain by a poisoned arrow to the eye. Yet Húrin stood firm, the dragon helm protecting him, his grief turning into a cold, unbreakable fury. He stood alone now, upon a mound of the dead, his great axe smoking with the black blood of his enemies. He was a figure of primordial power, a mortal man transformed into an avatar of war. As the sun began to set on that dreadful day, Húrin stood alone. The bodies of his entire household guard lay in a ring around him. He had cast away his shield, and wielded his axe in both hands. With every swing he cried out, "Are entuluva! Day shall come again." It was a cry of pure defiance against the encroaching darkness, a promise of a dawn he would not live to see. He would not break. He could not fall. The orcs could not slay him. They could not even approach him without being hewn apart. But their master, Morgoth, had watched the battle from his dark throne in Angband. He had seen the man in the dragon helm, whose will seemed as unyielding as the Valar themselves. Morgoth did not want this man dead. He wanted him broken. A command went out from Angband itself. Gothmog, the Balrog general, ordered his trolls to cast down their weapons, and his orcs to swarm the last man of Dor-lómin. Húrin was buried under a living mountain of his foes, pinned by their sheer weight. He fought on, even as the press of bodies suffocated him, his muffled cries of defiance still echoing from beneath the writhing pile. They dragged him down, alive and struggling, the dragon helm torn from his head. But capture was not the end Morgoth desired. For a spirit so strong, for a will so indomitable, the Dark Lord had conceived of a punishment far, far worse than a simple death. He would use this man's own unbreakable spirit as a weapon against everything he loved. Húrin's tragedy was only just beginning, and the curse that would fall upon his children would be carried into the world by the very helm that had been his strength. But how? How can a piece of steel and gold, however masterfully wrought, become a vessel for a curse? Was the dragon helm merely a symbol of the doom that followed Húrin's line? A relic stained by tragedy? Or, in the deep dungeons of Angband, in the very presence of the Dark Lord, did it become something more? Had Morgoth, in his infinite malice, poured a sliver of his own will into the inanimate object, turning a shield of heroes into a beacon for despair? To understand the helm's fate, we must first understand Húrin's. He was dragged before the black throne of Morgoth himself. There, in the deepest pit of the world, where the only light came from the hellfire of forges and the stolen brilliance of the Silmarils burning in Morgoth's iron crown, the Dark Lord offered the man a choice: serve him, and be given power and command, or refuse and watch his family wither and die in misery. Húrin, being Húrin Thalion the Steadfast, met the offer with only scorn. He would not break his oath to the elves and men, nor would he bow to the source of all the world's evil. And it was for this defiance that Morgoth devised his unique torment. He would not kill Húrin. He would not even torture his body. Instead, he took Húrin to the high peaks of the Thangorodrim, the triple volcanoes above Angband, and by his dark power he chained him to a stone chair. And Morgoth laid his curse upon him, saying, "Sit now there, and look out upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those whom thou lovest. For thou hast dared to mock me, and question the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore with my eyes shalt thou see, and with my ears shalt thou hear, and never shalt thou move from this place, until all is fulfilled unto its bitter end." This was the true nature of the curse. Húrin was made a helpless spectator to the ruin of his own family, but Morgoth's vision was a lie wrapped in truth. Húrin would see events as they happened, but they would be twisted, colored by malice, with every good deed appearing foolish, every hope a delusion, and every loving word a poisoned barb. He would watch his children's lives unfold as a grand, pointless tragedy, orchestrated for his own private agony. And the helm? Morgoth, in a stroke of brilliant, psychological cruelty, did not keep it. He had no use for it. Instead, he sent it back. He had it delivered as a mocking gift to Húrin's wife, Morwen, in their now occupied homeland of Dor-lómin. It was a message: "Your lord is not dead, but he is mine. This helm that was your house's glory is now just a piece of scrap I have returned to you. A reminder of your utter defeat." The people of Hador were now a broken and enslaved people. Their lands had been given over to the Easterlings, brutish men who had allied with Morgoth. Morwen lived as a prisoner in her own house, protecting her young son, Túrin, and her yet unborn daughter. The arrival of the helm was like a funeral shroud, but it held a strange power over the young boy, Túrin. He saw in it the father he could not remember, a symbol of a lost grandeur. He did not see the shadow that now clung to it, the imperceptible taint of Morgoth's will. Morwen, fearing for her son's life under the yoke of the Easterlings, made a heartbreaking choice. She would send Túrin away, to seek refuge in the hidden elven kingdom of Doriath, ruled by King Thingol. She hoped to save him from slavery, and perhaps from the shadow that seemed to be falling over their house. Túrin's journey was long and fraught with danger, but he eventually reached the enchanted forests of Doriath. King Thingol, who had been an ally of Húrin, took the boy in and raised him as his own foster son. Here, among the ancient trees and immortal elves, Túrin grew. He became tall and strong, skilled with the sword and bow, surpassing even his elven tutors in might and daring. But the curse of Morgoth was not so easily escaped. A shadow of doom lay upon him. He was proud, quick to anger, and carried a deep, unhealable grief in his heart for the family he had lost. He was known for his dark moods and his reckless courage. The elves loved him, but they also feared him, for it seemed that misfortune followed in his wake. All the while, his father Húrin watched through Morgoth's eyes, seeing his son's pride as arrogance, his grief as weakness, his every mistake magnified into a catastrophic failure. And what of the helm? It remained behind in Dor-lómin, with Morwen, a dark and silent heirloom. But fate, or rather the malicious will of Morgoth, had not finished with it. Years later, when Túrin had grown to manhood and become a great warrior on the borders of Doriath, news and messengers still passed between him and his lost home. Beleg Thalion, a great elven archer and Túrin's dearest friend, made the perilous journey to Dor-lómin to bring aid to Morwen. When Beleg was set to return, Morwen gave him the dragon-helm. "Give this to my son," she said. "If it may, let it guard him from death." It was an act of a mother's love, but it was also the final, crucial move in Morgoth's game. The curse, which had been a shadow over Túrin, was now being given a physical anchor, a direct conduit to its victim. Beleg brought the helm to Túrin, who was now leading a band of outlaws and fighting a guerrilla war against the orcs in the forests of Beleriand. When Túrin saw it, he was filled with a fire he had not felt since childhood. It was a link to his father, to his heritage, to the glory of the House of Hador. It was his birthright. He put it on, and in that moment, something shifted. The curse, which had been a weight on his spirit, now had a focus. The helm, imbued with Morgoth's seeing stone properties, made Túrin a beacon. No longer could he hide in the shadows. When he wore the dragon helm, all of Angban's attention was drawn to him. His enemies would always find him. It also amplified the darkest parts of his own nature. His pride hardened into arrogance. His grief festered into a brooding rage. His will to fight for good became a reckless, destructive force that often hurt his friends as much as his enemies. He became known as Mormogil, the Black Sword, and the fame of the man in the dragon helm spread across the land. But it was a fearsome, dreadful fame. For wherever the dragon helm went, victory was soon followed by an even greater tragedy. It protected his head, but it laid his heart bare to the curse. And so, wherever Túrin went, ruin followed. His pride, amplified by the helm, led to the sack of the great elven realm of Nargothrond by the dragon Glaurung, the father of lies. There, Túrin came face to face with the beast. He was caught in the serpent's gaze, ensnared by a spell of deceit, and sent on a fool's errand while his friends were slain behind him. Cursed and broken, he eventually cast aside the dragon helm, seeking to escape his past in the deep woods of Brethil. He took a new name, Turambar, Master of Doom, thinking he could at last command his own fate. For a time he found peace. He fell in love with a lost maiden he found wandering, Niniel, the Maid of Tears, a woman with no memory of her past. They were wed, and a brief, fragile light entered his life. But Morgoth's malice is patient. The doom he had woven was not yet complete. Glaurung the dragon, his work unfinished, came to the borders of Brethil, a creeping fire in the dark. To defend his new home and his new love, Túrin took up his black sword, Gurthang, but he left the dragon helm behind, vowing to face this final test as Turambar, not as the cursed Mormogil of his past. He chose his ground at the terrifying gorge of Kabed and Aras. As the great worm crawled over the ravine, Túrin, from below, thrust his sword deep into the beast's soft belly. The dragon roared in agony, thrashing and spewing black venom, and in its death throes it fell upon the riverbank with Túrin pinned beneath it, overcome by the poison and the dragon's final spell. He lay as one dead. Niniel, his wife, came seeking him, and found him lying senseless. But Glaurung was not yet dead. With his last breath, the dragon opened its dreadful eyes and spoke, and with venomous truth, it broke its own spell. He revealed to her that the man she called husband was her own long-lost brother, Túrin Turambar, and that she was Nienor, daughter of Húrin, who had fled the dragon's shadow only to fall into a darker one. The truth destroyed her. With a cry that seemed to tear the forest asunder, Nienor ran to the edge of the gorge and cast herself into the raging waters below, seeking the oblivion she had once been cursed with. When Túrin at last awoke, he was told of all that had passed. The full weight of Morgoth's curse, the purpose of his long torment, finally fell upon him. His entire life had been a tool for his enemy's hatred. He went to the place of the dragon's slaying, and spoke to his own blade. "Hail, Gurtang, iron of death," he said, his voice hollow. "From no blood wilt thou shrink. Wilt thou take Túrin Turambar? Wilt thou slay me swiftly?" And a cold voice answered from the blade itself, "Yea, I will drink thy blood, that I may forget the blood of my master Beleg, slain by thy hand. I will slay thee swiftly." And so ended the most tragic tale of the elder days. A great stone was set over their grave, but it could not contain the grief that radiated from it. The dragon helm lay forgotten in the ruins of Nargothrond, its purpose served. Morgoth's curse was fulfilled, a masterpiece of sorrow that would echo through the ages, a testament to the darkness that can cling to even the greatest of men, and the terrible price of a war fought against a god. The tales of the First Age are filled with triumph and despair, light and profound darkness. To ensure you don't miss a single story from the epic dawn of Middle-earth, subscribe now to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles.